The shack on the hill. In the heart of a fast-growing city, where cranes painted the sky and glass towers swallowed the sun, a small, crumbling shack sat at the edge of a quiet hill. The city had grown around it. Roads carved near its borders, malls spread their shadows across the fields nearby. But the shack never moved. Its walls were warped, its roof sagged, and the paint had long since surrendered to time. To most, it was nothing but a relic, a piece of stubbornness refusing to yield to progress. But one man saw it differently. Ethan Cole was one of the city's youngest and most ambitious real estate developers. At 36, he had already built empires of concrete and steel. His company's name adorned skylines and luxury towers, and his smiling face often appeared in business magazines, hailed as a visionary of urban renewal. When his team brought him news of a large plot of land on the outskirts of the city, perfect for a new luxury complex, he was intrigued. The only obstacle was the old shack. It stood right in the middle of the land he wanted, surrounded by overgrown grass and trees that had long forgotten pruning. His investors were impatient. The location was perfect, the plans already drawn, and profits projected to soar. All they needed was for that one piece of property to be acquired. And so, one sunny morning, Ethan decided to drive out himself, to see the place, to meet the owner, and to close the deal once and for all. The journey there felt almost nostalgic, though Ethan couldn't place why. The road curved past open fields, the air smelled of soil and wildflowers, things the city had forgotten. As his sleek black car pulled to a stop near the shack, he stepped out, adjusting his designer suit and scanning the property. The wooden structure leaned slightly to one side, the windows were smudged, and a faint trail of smoke rose from a crooked chimney. He chuckled to himself. This, he thought, was the last piece of the puzzle. The last relic of a forgotten era standing in the way of progress. He imagined it torn down, replaced by a glistening high-rise, cafes, gyms, penthouses, and rooftop pools overlooking the city. He could already see the advertisements, the profits, the headlines. But then something caught his attention. The land stretched far beyond what he had expected, past the shack into the hills toward a distant line of trees. He frowned, glancing at his blueprint. According to the documents his team had given him, only a few acres remained to be purchased. But what he saw looked far larger, miles maybe. It couldn't be right. Still, he decided to meet the owner. An old man his assistant had told him. Probably doesn't even know the real value of the property, she had said. You could probably buy it for the price of a small car. Ethan smiled at the thought. Easy money, easy expansion. As he stood there waiting, he noticed the old man emerging from behind the shack. Bent but steady, with hands calloused from years of labor, the man moved slowly but purposefully. He wore simple clothes, faded denim, worn boots, a hat to shield his eyes from the sun. Ethan watched him approach, still confident, still certain of how this meeting would go. The man nodded politely, as if greeting a neighbor rather than a millionaire. Ethan gestured toward the land, speaking with the enthusiasm of a salesman. He explained his vision: modern living, economic growth, development for the future. He painted pictures of progress and prosperity, of jobs and community. And when he finished, he mentioned the offer. A generous one, he thought. Enough to buy the old man comfort for the rest of his days. The old man didn't react. He only stood there, quiet, watching the city skyline in the distance. Then slowly he shook his head. Ethan's smile faltered. Perhaps the man hadn't understood. He repeated his offer, clearer this time, higher even. But again the old man shook his head. The silence stretched between them. The developer began to feel irritation creeping into his voice. He reminded the man that the city was expanding, that soon this land would be surrounded by skyscrapers anyway. He even mentioned that the shack would eventually be condemned by the city's zoning board. Still, the man simply looked at the hill, then back at Ethan, and gave a small, knowing smile. Frustrated, Ethan left that day, convinced the old man was simply being stubborn. He decided to let his lawyers handle it. Surely a few legal letters, maybe a slight increase in price, would solve the matter. But weeks turned into months, and every attempt failed. The man never budged. He never raised his voice, never made threats. He just kept saying no, and that was when Ethan decided to dig deeper. One night, sitting in his office overlooking the glittering skyline, he asked his research team to find out more about the property's history. The next morning, the report landed on his desk, and what he read left him speechless. The shack and the land surrounding it had belonged to the same family for nearly a century. Generations had lived and worked there, farmers, carpenters, even a few teachers. But more shocking was the size of the property. It wasn't just a few acres, it was nearly half the hill. The city's expansion had been built around it, not over it. Roads, malls, and towers stood on land that technically bordered but never touched this privately owned stretch. The old man wasn't refusing out of pride. He didn't need to sell. He owned one of the most valuable undeveloped tracts in the city. Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring at the report. His mind raced. The land was worth tens of millions, maybe more. Yet the man had never developed it, never sold a single piece. He simply lived there quietly, watching the city grow and change around him. Suddenly, the developer's laughter from that first day replayed in his mind, and it didn't sound so confident anymore. Determined to understand, Ethan returned to the hill, but this time without his suit or his car. He walked the land slowly, feeling the crunch of gravel under his shoes, hearing the wind whisper through the trees. The air was cooler here, cleaner somehow. From the top of the hill, the city skyline looked distant, almost fragile. For the first time, Ethan noticed the view, the way the light hit the buildings, the way the shadows stretched across the fields below. He realized why the old man refused to sell. It wasn't about money. It was about something far older, far deeper. A connection to the earth, to history, to the roots that money could never buy. The shack, he realized, wasn't just a home. It was a symbol of endurance, a reminder that progress didn't always mean replacement. Weeks passed and the project slowed. Investors grew restless, questioning his decisions. Competitors mocked him for letting one old man stop a multi-million-dollar venture. But something inside Ethan had shifted. He began spending more time away from the boardrooms and construction sites, visiting the hill in the early mornings, just watching the sunrise. He thought about his own beginnings, his parents who had worked tirelessly to put him through school, the small apartment where he'd once dreamed of building something meaningful. Somewhere along the line, in his rush for success, he had forgotten the value of stillness, of patience, of meaning beyond wealth. Then one day, word spread through the city. The old man had passed away peacefully in his sleep. The news was brief, tucked away in the back pages of a local newspaper. Few noticed except Ethan. He returned to the hill again, but this time the air felt different, heavier, quieter. The shack stood still, untouched, the smoke no longer rising from its chimney. For hours, Ethan wandered through the property, remembering every detail, every wordless lesson. He eventually found a small wooden cross behind the shack, simple and unadorned, marking the resting place of generations past. It was then that he made a decision, not as a developer but as a man. The land would remain untouched. No skyscraper would rise there, no mall, no highway. Instead, he would restore the shack, preserve the hill, and open it to the city, not as a project but as a park, a sanctuary of peace amid the chaos. A place where people could remember what truly mattered. Months later, when the gates finally opened, families came from across the city. They picnicked under the trees, watched sunsets from the hilltop, and children played where the old man once walked. A plaque stood at the entrance, bearing only a few words. This land was loved. May we learn to love as deeply. And every evening, as the city lights flickered below, Ethan would stand at the edge of the hill and watch. The skyline still glowed with ambition, but now it bowed slightly to the hill, to the quiet strength of a man who had refused to sell his soul for gold. Because some legacies are not built with bricks and steel. They are built with roots that refuse to move. And so, the rich developer who once laughed at the old man's shack came to understand that real wealth isn't measured in towers or profit margins, but in the peace of standing on land that remembers who you are. The wind carried his thoughts away over the city, through the lights and into the night, whispering softly as if the old man himself were still there, smiling from somewhere unseen. And as the stars began to rise above the quiet hill, the story of the shack, the land, and the lesson it held found its ending.